job, guys. Buonasera, good evening. My name is Dr. Tom Means, and at my college campus, they call me Professor Means. And here at my old high school, I'm just Tommy. So this is where I'm most comfortable. So thank you for having me. It's great to be back here. And I'm going to talk about languages tonight. And I've had the opportunity to do some pretty interesting things with languages. I've interpreted for some interesting people. I've taught at 6 different universities. I've written some books. And it all started here. I came pretty late to the game of learning different languages. I was 14 here at OTHS in 1989 when I had my first Italian class with Mrs. Bio, Signora Bio. So that's when my flame was lit. And since then, it has never gone out. It's only grown in intensity. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about language learning, and I'm going to start by saying that there may be no such thing as language learning. There's only language using. Human languages, when you look at them in a book, they can't be learned because they're too dynamic, they're too chaotic, they're too irregular, as we all know. All we can do as students of languages and teachers of languages is use them. So one personal anecdote. When I was 19 years old, as a sophomore at Rutgers University, I moved to Rome for a year by myself. I had been an A student in Italian, and once I got to Italy, I immediately realized I could not understand a thing. I could barely utter a word. I could not create anything that was functional. And I knew it was going to be a long year. But I stuck it out, and especially across the first 2 very lonely months, I had to use Italian a lot. I had to use it to eat, to find my way around, and to try and meet people. When I came back to the US 2 semesters later, the language had revealed its mysterious patterns and its secret codes to me. And I told everybody, yeah, I learned Italian. Now I look back and realize, well, yes, it was a success, but it was a success in using a language. So, am I being too reductionist? Can it really be so simple that you just have to use a language? Well, there's a scientific field that explores an idea like this. The field is called second language acquisition. It's a branch of applied linguists, and I'm an applied linguist. So the main finding in my field is that the way humans learn languages is by using it. And by using it, I mostly mean by hearing a language, by seeing a language. So part of what I'm going to do tonight is challenge your definition of what using a language is. There's also enough evidence that you need to produce it. You need to speak the language. You need to write the language. But that production is ineffective if you're not primarily taking in the language, if you're not primarily using the language with your ears and with your eyes. So it turns out that being a language teacher is like a gas station attendant. True. And all my language students are parked cars, naturally. So if I were your teacher, and you guys were my students, my Italian students, right now, you'd be my parked cars. So I want everybody to try and channel their inner parked car right now, okay? You there? Good. All right. So the problem is that your tank is empty. Your tank is bone dry. The only way you can fill your tank is with examples of the new language. We call that input. Hearing and seeing a language a lot is the only input you need. Input is the gasoline that you parked cars need to move forward in your new language. My colleague Bill Van Patten shared this metaphor in one of his books, and for me, as a successful user of 5 languages, it squares with all my experiences. We acquire languages when we use them in a meaningful way. So now let's talk about using a language. What does that mean? So in order to arrive at that definition, let's all think of how we use language, how we use our own languages every day. We're awake for around 16 hours a day. Assuming you sleep for 8 hours, most humans are awake for 16 hours a day. How many hours, how many minutes of your 16 hours are you actually producing language? Well, unless you're really engaging, I hope you're not speaking all the time. I hope you're not dashing out messages all the time. So it's probably something around 90 minutes that if someone were to follow you with a timer, that you'd actually be speaking in a given day, that you'd actually be writing. That's 9% of your waking hours. So what are you doing with language for the other 91% of your waking hours? Well, you're probably hearing language, like you are right now. You're probably seeing language in some form. Maybe you're reading language. This is what I mean by using a language. This is how we humans use language. We mostly take it in. And most of what we take in interests us, or has meaning for us, or has a purpose for us. Now, we do produce it, even if it's only for 9% of our waking hours. But these productions are very important. We express our opinions, our preferences. We order things. We refuse things. We laugh. We organize life's necessities by talking about them and writing about them. Our food, our sleep, our activities. This same definition of using a language applies to a new language. Since I'm speaking at a school tonight with you, let's think about how this principle can be applied to graduate more successful language users today and tomorrow. In order for us to produce more successful language users in languages like Spanish, Chinese, Italian, French, Portuguese, etc., it must start with the teachers. I'm going to outline 2 steps tonight, and this is step 1. Our teachers must be trained to deliver real talk in the target language. What's real talk? Well, I should probably walk the talk right now by giving you a little sample of it in Italian. So let's pretend for a minute that you're in my Italian class and we're working on a unit. Let's say this whole week we're working on clothing. And after this brief introduction in English, I'm going to start talking to you about clothing in Italian. Okay? Va bene? Bene, cominciamo. Bene, allora, cosa porto stasera? Stasera porto una giacca, porto un completo, una giacca blu e i pantaloni blu. Porto una camicia, sotto la giacca porto una camicia e sotto la camicia porto una maglietta bianca. Gli occhiali. Senza gli occhiali non posso vedere. Mi servono gli occhiali. All right, Italian class is over. So, if I delivered my real talk well enough just now, you could follow what I was talking about in broad strokes. To do that, I follow a few strategies. I use short sentences. I rephrase, I reword, and I talk about something concrete, something here and now. Again, I owe thanks to Bill Van Patten for this particular definition of real talk. I would call this step 1 in order for us to start producing more language users in our schools. Step 1 is to train the teachers to identify and deliver real talk. And I emphasize identify because that's also going to include finding YouTube videos where speakers of that language are using it engagingly. Identifying audio recordings where speakers of that language are using it in a real way. Finding written passages that are relevant to the task at hand. That's step 1. Step 2 is a bunch of tasks that our students must accomplish in the new language. Going back to our Italian class, and the clothing unit we're working on this week, I would probably assign all of you a task about clothing. And you'd have to accomplish that task at the end of the unit. So if we're talking about clothing all week, I'd tell you at the beginning of the week what your task is to do at the end of the week. It could be as simple as this. Right now, I'd like all of you to look at a person sitting next to you and identify one article of clothing. Just take a notice: jeans, shirt, tie, dress, shoes. All right? Look at your neighbor and identify one article of clothing. Got it? Bene. Now here would be your task at the end of the week. In Italian, I want you to create 5 true or false statements about what your neighbor is wearing. A task like this would give you extra motivation to pay attention to all the real talk that's going to come at you in the 5 days preceding it. Again, that's not just going to be the teacher giving you real talk. It's going to be the teacher sharing YouTube videos, audio recordings, and written snippets of the language. And a task like this, critically, would invite you to use your Italian that you're learning in real time. It would invite you to use your Italian in a factual way and or a silly way. What do I mean by silly? Well, you can imagine having fun with this. Maybe you're sitting next to a big guy wearing jeans, and when you do your presentation about him, you say, "Lui porta una minigonna, vero o falso?" In English, this guy's wearing a mini skirt, true or false? So you're inviting a little bit of silliness. If a task like this is sequenced very clearly, the students would have a structure to follow. They'd have a reason to take in all the real talk that's coming at them. They'd have demonstrations, very precise demonstrations on how they're supposed to use the language at the end of the week. And their successful experience of the language is practically guaranteed. Most importantly, if the real talk, step 1, if the real talk and the task performance, step 2, if these two come together naturally, we've started an upward spiral of language use. And that will beget more language use and more understanding. I've now been teaching in the college classroom for 20 years, and this is the only way I teach. My students learn by doing. They learn through experiencing real talk. And they learn through personal experience and maybe personal creativity. As a language educator, I've done the only truly responsible thing I had to do. I put gas in their tanks, and when it was good and full, only after hours of level-appropriate, engaging input, when the tank was good and full, I gave them a clear goal to drive through. They were able to do it. They had been given the tools to do it. Successful language use was accomplished. And hopefully, the upward spiral of really using a language has been touched off or sustained. One final point about graduating more successful language users in the schools of our country. And I mean this from kindergarten through the 16th grade. That one final point is that the report card must change. If the paradigm of language learning shifts to one of successful language using, then the report card must reflect that change. We must assign grades based only on students' demonstrated comprehension of the new language and their accomplishment of successful tasks in the new language. The era of trying to figure out a new method for learning, for teaching, is over. The scientific findings are in. Fields like mine, second language acquisition, have now bestowed upon us decades and decades of consistent principles. Humans acquire new languages when they use them in realistic ways. And remember, using a language should only be approximately 9% production. Right now, we are all using language. We now know the nourishment that their brains need in a new language. Lots and lots of input. And we know what motivation their minds need to jumpstart the upward spiral. They need to accomplish useful tasks. So I say let's get to it. Let's have our own real talk about how humans use languages. And let's apply it in our classrooms. It's both common sense and scientifically valid. We use language to learn language. Grazie. Gracias. Thank you.